So we took the plunge and we're in the happiest country in the world. This is going to be perhaps the last trip before 2 become 3. So yeah, we're going to make the most of it, and we're starting with hot dog from a gas station, which is, by the way, delicious.
We were barely 2 months away from the birth of our first child. And before my doctors eventually put a travel ban on me, we decided there probably wasn't a more interesting place we could visit than one of the happiest countries in the world. Because we wanted to understand something very simple. Why does happiness seem to feel different here? Copenhagen is famous for design, Hygge, and some of the most influential restaurants in the world. This is the city of Noma, the restaurant that helped turn Copenhagen into a global food pilgrimage. And at this stage of the pregnancy, food felt like one of the best ways to understand the city.
Oh, yummy. It's so fragrant. You should try all.
Our journey through Denmark had actually started a couple of days earlier in a place we genuinely didn't know existed before planning this trip, the Danish Riviera. Yes, Denmark apparently has a Riviera too. But we'll come back to that later, because for now, we were finally in Copenhagen. And after a long travel day, arriving in Nyhavn almost felt like stepping directly into the version of Copenhagen we had imagined in our heads. Canals, historic buildings, boats everywhere, people sitting by the water long past sunset. For the next few days, this harbour was going to be home. We checked into 71 Nyhavn Hotel, an old warehouse turned boutique hotel sitting right on the canal. And somehow, during peak summer, we had managed to get a room looking straight out over the harbour. Not a bad way to arrive in Copenhagen. Halfway through the trip, we'd moved to another hotel in the city. At the time, it just felt like a split stay. We didn't realize yet how important that move would eventually become. Copenhagen made our first evening very easy. Our dinner reservation was literally across the canal from the hotel, just one tiny bridge away. Inside the former home of Noma was Restaurant Barr, a restaurant known for reimagining traditional Nordic comfort food. And for our first proper evening in the city, it felt like the perfect place to begin. The first thing we noticed at Barr wasn't the food. It was how comfortable everything felt.
We don't have you going far. It's on the first table again. That's on the first table again.
No stiffness, no theatre, no pressure to treat dinner like a performance. Just really good food in a room full of people genuinely enjoying themselves.
Is it amazing?
First, hopefully.
Just like completely takes over your whole mouth. Right? Besides the mackerel, it's exactly the same thing.
The first course was beautifully simple. Cherry tomatoes, a bright dressing, and for Ankit, some incredibly fresh raw fish. Since I was pregnant and was avoiding anything raw, the kitchen quietly adjusted parts of the menu for me without making it feel complicated. And that tiny gesture stayed with us. Because the best hospitality usually isn't dramatic. It's making people feel taken care of without making them feel different. And somewhere between the food, the room, the conversations around us, and the Copenhagen summer light outside, we stopped thinking about whether the restaurant was famous or not. We were just having a really good night.
This rye bread with so many seeds is not only healthy, but it's absolutely delicious. And with butter,
The next morning, Copenhagen looked completely different. Grey skies, rain over Nyhavn, a faint rainbow outside our window. We had originally planned to start the morning at St. Peter's Bageri, one of Copenhagen's oldest bakeries, except it had shut down. So the plan collapsed before breakfast. Classic travel. Somewhere in the rain, we pivoted to Andersen and Maillard instead. Standing by the roadside with coffee in one hand, pastries in the other, and me trying very hard to stay dry. And somehow, that ended up becoming one of our favorite mornings in the city. No major attraction, no big moment, just coffee, rain, and Copenhagen moving a little slower than usual. By afternoon, we had made our way to Kødbyen, Copenhagen's old meatpacking district. I'm sorry if I butchered the pronunciation. And suddenly, the city shifted again. Less postcard, more industrial, more creative. Right in the middle of it was Kødbyens Fiskebar. If bar felt warm and comforting, Fiskebar felt like Copenhagen's cooler side. Stylish, energetic, and effortlessly confident without trying too hard. We ordered mussels, oysters for Ankit, warm bread with herb butter, and one of the most delicately balanced monkfish dishes we've had. I think our faces revealed our excitement and how happy we were with the food that the server in fact brought the chef outside, asked us if we would like to see how the plating is done, and at one point we were invited into the kitchen to watch the chefs plate some of the dishes right in front of us. There was precision to everything, but never pretentiousness.
Here used to be like the meat packing district, like the butcher place for all the meat in Copenhagen.
Right.
But then the places started leaving, so the commune, the government just made it like a heritage site.
That evening, we took the ferry to another side of Copenhagen. Our first stop was La Banchina, a tiny waterfront cafe that has become one of the city's most iconic summer hangout spots. People were jumping into the canal, warming up inside saunas, sitting by the water, and carrying on with their evening like the rain didn't even matter at all. A short walk later, we reached Reffen, a huge open-air street food market built along the waterfront. Smoke from the grills everywhere, music playing across the harbour, long communal tables packed with people staying far later than they probably planned to. And somehow, even with hundreds of people around, the whole place felt relaxed. Eventually, we found a Norwegian hot dog stand that instantly reminded us of our trip to Norway. Still one of our favorite trips ever. And maybe that was the charm of this whole evening. Nothing felt optimized. You just walked, ate whatever looked good, sat by the water, and stayed longer than you intended to. The next morning started with 2 rainbows over Nyhavn, which honestly felt almost suspiciously on brand for Copenhagen. Before the harbour filled up for the day, we spent the morning just slowly walking around Nyhavn, watching ferries move through the canal, people setting up cafes along the waterfront, and the city gradually waking up around us. And then we took the ferry across the canal to Hart Bageri, a bakery created by one of the original pastry chefs from Noma. Strong coffee, incredible pastries, good conversations, and absolutely no reason to rush anywhere. We met a friend there, sat by the water for hours, and slowly watched Copenhagen drift by around us. That was the strange thing about the city. The slower it got, the more enjoyable it became. And somewhere between the ferry rides, quiet mornings in Nyhavn, and long conversations by the canal, Copenhagen stopped feeling like a city we were visiting. Instead, it started feeling like a city we could very easily live in. One place we were especially curious to experience in Copenhagen was Christiania, a neighborhood that started when a group of hippies and artists took over an abandoned military base in the 1970s and decided to create their own way of living. For years, it became known for alternative lifestyles, handmade homes, and even open cannabis trade right in the middle of Copenhagen. And honestly, it felt unlike anywhere else we had experienced in the city so far. Raw, creative, and a little rebellious, which somehow made Copenhagen feel even more interesting. Because happiness here suddenly stopped feeling connected to perfection. There was room here for individuality too, for weirdness, for experimentation, for people choosing to live differently. And just like that, we were back on the metro again, moving into yet another version of the city. Lunch was at Aamanns, one of the restaurants most credited with reinventing traditional Danish Smørrebrød for the new generation. Open-faced sandwiches that looked incredibly redefined, but still somehow felt simple and familiar at the same time. And honestly, that became one of the most fascinating things about Copenhagen. The city kept taking ordinary, everyday experiences and elevating them through care and attention. Even something as simple as lunch felt intentional here. And honestly, it was delicious.
Very interesting.
By evening, we ended the day at Høst, a restaurant people kept recommending to us whenever the conversation turned into Hygge. And honestly, it probably came closer than anywhere else to what we had imagined Copenhagen would feel like before arriving here.
Thank you. This is so good. Wow. Golgappe ice cream.
After a few days in Nyhavn, Copenhagen had started feeling strangely familiar. So moving hotels almost felt like moving into a completely different version of the city. We left the quiet canals behind and checked into Villa Copenhagen. And suddenly, everything felt bigger. Busier streets, more movement, more energy outside the windows. Where 71 Nyhavn felt tucked quietly into the harbour, Villa Copenhagen felt right in the middle of everything. And from our room, we could see Tivoli Gardens and Copenhagen Central Station sitting directly outside the window. At the time, it felt like a very good view. We didn't realize yet how important that window would eventually become. After checking into Villa Copenhagen, we headed back into the city. And this was a completely different side of Copenhagen again. Busy squares, crowds everywhere, street musicians, summer energy spilling into every corner of the city. We had a few food spots saved for the afternoon, but most of the plans didn't really work out. So eventually, we gave up and got hot dogs from DOP instead.
What do we have here?
Spicy beef.
Ooh,
Classic.
and classic pork.
A tiny sandwich scene on somebody feed fill. I'll be honest, sitting there in the middle of the square with hot dogs and cola ended up being one of the most fun afternoons of the trip. And then suddenly, Ankit got stung by a bee. Right there in the square. One minute we were peacefully eating hot dogs. The next minute we were trying to figure out Danish anti-allergies before our Michelin-star dinner reservation later that evening, which somehow made the whole day even more memorable. Well, that evening, we found ourselves standing outside what looked like a completely ordinary apartment building. No grand entrance, no obvious sign. Nothing that suggested one of Copenhagen's most celebrated restaurants was hidden behind that door. Someone buzzed us in, walked us through the building, and suddenly, we were inside Alouette.
Welcome to Alouette. We have one menu tonight where we tell you the story of Danish agriculture and its terroirs through 4 plots. Each plot represents a different farm in Denmark that we work very closely with to bring you the best things in season right now through a multitude of dishes.
Tiny, dimly lit, quiet in a way that immediately changed our energy the moment we walked in. Even the way the food was presented felt thoughtful without trying too hard to impress you. And then there was Ankit, slightly swollen from the bee sting, heavily medicated on antihistamines, and trying very hard to stay awake through one of the best meals of the trip. I'm laughing at it right now, but honestly, at that point of time, it was slightly scary. A hidden restaurant, a sleepy husband, a very pregnant wife. And somehow, it ended up becoming one of the evenings we still talk about the most.
Center cut fillet of the trout. It's been.
The next day, we had reservations at Beast, officially ranked the 13th best pizzeria in the world, which felt slightly absurd considering the place still somehow felt casual enough to walk into, wearing rain-soaked clothes and carrying broken umbrellas. Yep, we had broken umbrellas. And getting there turned into an adventure of its own. By the time we reached the restaurant, the rain had become so heavy that even our umbrellas had basically stopped functioning. But the moment we stepped inside, everything changed. The smell of the wood-fired oven, the warmth of the room, pizzas being prepared right in front of us, it instantly felt comforting. Well, Beast ended up capturing something we had started noticing all across Copenhagen. Simple things done with ridiculous care. Pizza, cheese, bread, ingredients that tasted unbelievably fresh. Nothing about it felt overcomplicated, just incredibly well made. At one point, we noticed a painting of Barack Obama hanging on the wall and later found out that he also visited Beast during a trip to Copenhagen. Honestly, it was completely unbelievable. Dining at the same place as Barack Obama, amazing. Beast had the kind of atmosphere that makes you want to cancel the rest of your plans and stay for another pizza. That evening, we finally visited Tivoli Gardens.
We are in the oldest, the first ever amusement park in the world.
In the world.
Very well maintained and an amazing experience to have. The moment we walked inside, the entire place just felt joyful. Yeah, that's the word. Families everywhere, couples walking through the gardens hand in hand, children running between rides, music drifting through the park. And what surprised us the most was how much Tivoli seemed woven into everyday life here. It didn't feel like a tourist attraction people visited once. It felt like a shared summer tradition for the entire city. And even though we didn't go on a single ride, something about Tivoli instantly brought out a very childlike energy in both of us. Almost immediately, we found ourselves thinking the same thing. We need to come back here with Rahi someday. As evening slowly turned into night, the lights came on across the park and Tivoli started glowing in every direction around us. After missing Gasoline Grill earlier in the trip because it was closed, Tivoli finally became our chance to try it.
Must have.
So we grabbed burgers, found a table, and settled into the atmosphere around us. And then live music started filling the park. At first, we didn't think much of it. And then we realized who was playing. Michael Learns to Rock in Tivoli. Songs that instantly took us back to school days, old playlists, long drives, and a version of life that suddenly felt very, very far away and strangely close at the same time. And standing there in the middle of Tivoli, surrounded by lights, music, and thousands of people singing along together, the entire evening suddenly started feeling emotional in a way we hadn't expected. Like one chapter of life was very quietly giving way to another. As we left Tivoli, almost everyone told us the same thing. Make sure you're back for the fireworks. But nobody knew we already had the best seats in the house. The very same window we had mentioned earlier, overlooking Tivoli Gardens. After everything we had experienced that day and throughout the trip, having this moment quietly to ourselves somehow felt even more special. In that moment, it felt like a celebration, not just of the trip, but of everything that had brought us to this point together. All the years behind us and the beautiful new chapter waiting ahead of us. There couldn't have been a more perfect ending to our time in Denmark. Perfectly matching the beginning of our trip because this story didn't quite start in Copenhagen. Our journey through Denmark had actually started a couple of hours west of Copenhagen. It was a bit of a detour for us, but we knew we had to begin this trip in Odense, the hometown of Hans Christian Andersen. The Little Mermaid, Thumbelina, The Ugly Duckling. Sounds familiar? Stories we had grown up with without ever really thinking about where they came from. And standing there, just before becoming parents ourselves, it all felt strangely full circle. From Odense, instead of heading straight to Copenhagen, we drove north towards the Danish Riviera. Tucked along the coastline of Gilleleje, a quiet seaside town where life moved at a completely different pace. And looking back now, that's probably where we first started understanding Denmark. Not through attractions, not through checklist, but through rhythm. Long summer evenings by the harbor, ice cream walks together after dinner, quiet drives along the coast, people sitting together for hours with absolutely nowhere else to go. Before Copenhagen showed us the energy of Danish life, the Riviera showed us its balance. And maybe that balance stayed with us most after leaving Denmark. Not constantly chasing bigger moments, just learning how to enjoy the life happening between them. If pursuit of happiness is your travel mantra, like this video and hit the subscribe button. Until next time, keep trippin' like a local.